Okay, we are live. I'm going to dive straight in with a quick intro. So if anyone is joining at any point in time, you'll be able to see what we're chatting about in the comments. But hopefully people are already starting to join. I'm not sure how I can see this. This is my first setting up of a LinkedIn Live. So I'm like, if anyone has got any comments, if anyone can contribute any feedback, please feel free to do so. But today I am joined by an incredible panel of guests. We're going to be talking about an important topic, burnout. And anyone that's joining this LinkedIn Live, I know that you have probably contributed towards the research that I've been doing, or you share a heavy interest in everything that's going on. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for contributing to the research. And what we're trying to bring to life today is not just the insights from what we found and why so many people in product suffer with burnout, but also trying to bring to life some of those tips, examples, and things that you can actually do to make a change so that you can go away and have a positive impact. So I'm joined by Evelina, Graham, and Nick. And these are all experts that can share with you some of their own stories and also different things about what you can do in your organization and what you can do at a personal level and a leadership level to start having some positive impacts on your experience. So yeah, that's the quick overview. Evelina, would you be able to just give a quick briefing for anyone that might feel triggered by anything that we talk about today?
Yeah, so as we talk about burnout, very often people are caught by surprise because there are so many blind spots. When we talk about the burnout, it's very difficult to notice it in ourselves. It's very difficult to notice it in others. But as we start highlighting some of the kind of signs to watch out for, it can really hit home when that realization comes that maybe I am experiencing this. So this is just kind of a heads up warning that we will be sharing some of this vulnerable raw information. So if you find yourself being touched somehow by the content and some of the stories that we're sharing, it's up to you to draw those boundaries. Feel free to step away from the conversation if needs be. We will be sharing resources at the very end. And of course, feel free to reach out to any of us if you would like any other help and support. So just a little bit of a heads up that this will be a raw, open and vulnerable conversation.
Perfect. What I am now going to do is just go through and talk a little bit about the different experience that I've had and kind of what actually went ahead to inspire this research. So the whole point in going through this conversation was that a few years ago, particularly almost 3 years ago today, I went and had a bit of an issue with burnout myself. And I have a diary that I cover off like year after year, and I write down different thoughts and feelings about what's going on. And my diary entries from 3 years ago were that I had a rash all over my body. I felt physically sick. I was working the longest days possible, and I didn't really know what was happening or why. I was basically trying to take on loads of responsibility, make sure I could prove myself when I take on more teams that could work at a higher level, and make sure that I could do all of the things needed to progress my career. And I'm one of those people that's always wanted to work really hard, and I always thought that I needed to push myself further and further to have a kind of impact in my career. Like, for example, I broke my hip when I was 26, and I still took a call the day after high on morphine because it was for a business critical product, which no one should ever do. Like, I do not recommend working from hospital, full stop. And I don't know why I thought that was a good idea, and I also don't know why my managers thought that was a good idea. But that's something that I know we need to change. And then I started coaching different product people, and almost everyone that came to me for coaching was because they'd had their own experience with burnout, which made me realize that at least 50% of people in product are kind of suffering from burnout. So I thought I'd go ahead and do some research to try and put some more numbers behind that and find out what was really going on. And it turns out that almost 92% of people in product have either experienced burnout or had issues getting close to that point. So it's something that we really need to dig into and touch on, and that's what we're doing today. So from your guys' point of view, I know you've probably all got similar stories. What would you say has happened in your space, and how does that story kind of resonate? Feel free, any of you.
Yeah, I can start. I think for me, you know, even when I see your story and where you come from, it really resonates with me. Even though, you know, I don't work necessarily in the product management, product development space, but I can see, you know, working as a coach, working as a consultant, I can see how many people are being affected by this nowadays, and this is the area where I specialize in supporting people's well-being and organizational resilience in the workplaces. But for me personally, I have experienced burnout myself, and I think for me there was this huge misconception where you think that, you know, you talk about resilience and, you know, some people who can kind of thrive and grow with challenges, stress, pressure, and then others end up like really struggling in exactly the same experiences. And you think, why and what makes a difference? And for me, you know, there's this one aspect that you think you have to have the strong positive mindset. And to me, that was exactly what led me to burnout, because I was a yes person. I didn't have clear boundaries. I believe that I can do everything, you know, for as long as I believe that I can do this, I can take this on, right? So I think for me, that what led me to the place where I wasn't paying attention to my body, what my body is telling me, and I was just led by my head, and I was not giving my body rest and self-care that was needed to prevent this. So burnout was not enough. I still carried on. And then I ended up having a tumor, which was pretty much stress-induced tumor. And this is a very common thing that, you know, when we are neglecting some of our body's needs, our body will come up with that message to say it in a way. So hopefully some of these conversations that we are setting up and the insights of this research will help other people to notice those signs before you get to that extreme place. So yeah, thank you for really all the work that you do, and I think this is so much needed research.
No, I agree, and like absolutely get to that point in the conversation to talk about how you can recognize those signs and symptoms, because like you say, like wait to the point where you get to a stress-induced tumor is absolutely way too far. So there's a lot more that we need to do to acknowledge those things and be able to make those changes in advance. Graham and Nick, like, is there anything from your stories that are similar or different that you want to share?
I think for me, I actually don't know if I've hit kind of burnout myself. And I think for me, it's sometimes difficult. You know, I've suffered with depression for 13 years, you know, since my first daughter was born. And, you know, through some very interesting episodes, you know, along the way, quite often caused by, you know, kind of external, you know, influences, you know, home and job and things like that. And certainly been very tough, you know, over the last kind of 6 months. Certainly when I've been out of kind of full-time work, you know, has been very, very tough as well. But I find that the symptoms and for me are quite similar. You know, very, very, you know, pressure. Putting a lot of pressure on myself to do things, to do well, to want to do more. So I honestly don't know. I don't know what I have and haven't suffered with, because I think it's so closely aligned, you know, for me in you know, in my own depression. But for the work that I do, you know, within the product mind community, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, you know, there are so many people and so many stories in product management specifically, people that are just at the end. They are just completely, you know, on the cusp, if not already over, into burnout, and just don't know kind of what to do next. Don't necessarily see how to get themselves out, how to, you know, how to fight that, how to get themselves back to where they were before. So this as a conversation, just as a starting conversation, is going to be fantastic for them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's so much of the important part that we can share is like, A, how do you recognize these things like Evelina was saying, but B, how do you start to not, I think for too long in product, we've just accepted this as normal. We've just accepted it as part of the job that we take on more and we do so much, and that we're those kind of people that put that pressure on ourselves. But actually, where this conversation is starting to shift here, and it's really nice that we can bring this to life for so many people, is that so many of us are experiencing this, and we should actually start to make a change in this space. Nick, and particularly for you, I know that you've gone through similar kind of experiences, but you also talk about this stuff at a leadership level now. How do you think that lens impacts things?
I mean, so much of what you're all saying, resonates with me. Not quite to the extent that Evelina mentioned about when I was burning out. I was aware of it, but I think I differentiate between having awareness and taking action. And taking action sounds so simple, but when you're in the midst of that and when your head's not in the right place and when physically you've got nothing left to give, taking the action is really hard, because that action might be to nourish yourself, and that's really difficult. The action might be to get yourself out of bed in the morning, but the action could be have a difficult conversation with my line manager, leave my job, figure out another way of paying my mortgage. And they're exponentially greater actions that we need to take when we don't have the capability to do that. So I always talk about awareness and action, but taking action can sometimes be really difficult. And for me, I was getting heart pains, and at 38 I knew something was very, very wrong, but it took me getting to that point before I felt compelled to take any kind of action. For me, I like to think about solving this problem as a collective problem. And we're very good in product at thinking about collaboration and exploring problems from different points of view. For this problem, there are things we can do as individuals, both for ourselves and to support other people. But the leadership and the organizational lens for me is where the rubber really hits the road, because as individuals, we're limited by the systems we're in. We're limited by the environments we're in. If we don't see our leaders role modeling the right behaviors, it's very difficult for us to challenge, change, or affect how we show up in what can be quite high pressured environments. I know we're going to talk about it later, but I think there is so much more that product leaders should be doing on this problem. And what I'd probably end this little segment on is that in product, we're very good at prioritizing problems, and we prioritize based on value and impact. So what I want to understand is, why are product leaders not prioritizing a problem that is having a monumental impact on more than 9 out of 10 product people?
Yeah, and I think that's the change that we can all acknowledge now we need to start to make. Whereas when I go back to my example where I was like, oh, I was in hospital and I was still expected to jump on this call, like that understanding that this was a priority of something that we needed to solve wasn't there. It was like business impact and everything first. And actually what you find is that from some of the statistics that I've got, 12% of people at least left their job due to burnout. So it's something that's impacting the workforce. And as someone else mentioned, it's not just that. It's like if businesses need to know that there's impact there, it's also the fact that if you are hitting that point, you can't do your work sustainably, and you're going to come across these different problems over time, and it's going to impact your whole team. So yes, we should be doing it because it's the right thing, but we should also be focusing on this for business reasons. So what I'll do now is I will go through some of the insight that I have, and we'll be going back to the panel for different discussions on some of these topics and getting those insights from what can be done. And what I'll also do is I'll share this report afterwards. I was hoping I'd be able to add it in a comment, but I can't on this streaming service. So I'll hopefully add it to the page afterwards. And if anyone else wants this report, please reach out to me and I'll be able to share it directly. But this has covered everything that I found from the research and what those high level statistics are. So as Graham said, like it can be quite hard to identify whether you are the person that's suffering with burnout or if something else is going on. And as Evelina and Nick alluded to, and even myself, we actually let this get so far that we've been looking at physical symptoms as opposed to just recognizing what some of these mental symptoms might be. So for anyone that doesn't know, the official definition of burnout that comes from the World Health Organization is that burnout is something that's particularly associated with the workplace. It's not associated with anything else that's happening outside of it. And the typical symptoms to look out for that you can recognize in yourselves are feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from your job or cynicism or negativism towards it, and reduced effectiveness in terms of what it takes to actually do your job. So if you're experiencing any of those things, even at an early stage, and when I was doing the research, I asked people if they'd experienced this for 6 months or longer. And even people that didn't diagnose or like didn't identify that they thought they'd been through burnout, only one person in the survey responded and said that they hadn't experienced any of these symptoms for a prolonged period of 6 months or more in product. So that already shows that even before, I think sometimes we have this tendency to say, oh, but for me, it wasn't that bad. Oh, I've not had heart problems, for example. Like, that doesn't mean that this isn't a problem. That doesn't mean that it's something that people aren't suffering through. So if you're already starting to experience some of these kind of symptoms, these are the ones to start looking out for and saying, do you know what, actually, like, this is something that we need to do something about, either for myself or in the organization.
Evie, if I can just add something on that, on the concept of definition. So this definition is actually criticized in some ways for the fact that it completely dismisses all of the personal contributing factors to it, right? Because burnout is not exclusively occupational phenomenon. And yet in this definition, it is made as this is just something that's exclusive to work. But in reality, we know that our lives and work, you know, all of the things that are happening to us are so closely interconnected. And therefore, if you are going through some stressful life experiences, if you have a new baby at home, if you don't sleep properly, if you have, some other losses in your life that are happening, it will contribute to that burnout as well. So I think definitely as we look at that definition, and we want to look at that for the purpose of this call as a work phenomenon, it's also important as leaders, as individuals, to really look at all of the other contributing factors that are adding up to that as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And these were the questions that we made sure we were asking in this survey, was to try and understand how much of it is work related versus how much of it is impacted by things outside of work. And I think it's really important to have that awareness, especially in yourself, because there might be different areas that you need to change. And one of the analogies that I'll give people and say to people all the time is that if you've got other things going off in your life, sometimes that means that you can't give 100% to work. And like I even gave the example of like, oh, I broke my hip. But it's like, yeah, that doesn't mean that I should then have the expectation to still be given 100% to work. There's other things that are going on, and having that awareness and consideration is key, no matter what that life change is or those things are that you're experiencing. And even on this, so like I say, in terms of the research, like, so many people recognize these symptoms in themselves anyway. And I think in product, so many of these factors can be work related and can be amplified by other things that are happening. And then when it comes down to the actual number of people that recognize themselves as being burnt out, I ran a wider survey to try and reduce any bias from the data that I was looking at on a LinkedIn poll. And there were around 228 respondents, and like the majority of those said that they'd been burnt out. That was where at least 92% of people had been close to burnout or had experienced burnout. And from a sample size of 111 people, the stats that I have here show that 80% of people have suffered from burnout, and people have suffered from burnout more than once, which is quite scary. It's something that you can't just experience and then bounce back from and say, okay, learnt my lesson, like I'll do something about this and I'll make changes next time. It's something that people are experiencing on a repeat basis. So the bits that I'd love us to dive into there. My first question is for you, Graham, on why do you think this number is so high from product people? So as you mentioned before, you have so many people in the product mind community that are experiencing this kind of thing, and I'm sure you've heard plenty of stories. So like, why do you think it is happening?
I think I don't think I would almost certainly say for sure that there are a number of very specific reasons that are common to everybody that's saying this, but not just within my community, but you see so much of it on the likes of LinkedIn and other professional organizations. A lot of this is people's own perception of their own job. How they feel that they are doing versus what they read about, what they see. My colleague Beck Shelland, did a great article about the product, the product guru complex of, people that are, very well known and saying about, you must do these 21 things if you are to be considered a good product manager, and if you're not doing it, etc., etc. There is so much pressure right now on product management in particular, I feel, at least within our sphere of working, to be keeping up with these people, to be kind of constantly comparing ourselves. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to be doing at the best of times, let alone in a time whereby there are layoffs, there is no money available to continue. There is reduction in companies supporting the growth of their and the training and learning budgets and things like that of their people. There are people being laid off and so being out of work for a prolonged period of time as well. There is question marks over the validity of product management as a whole. Not the same that is happening to engineers and designers and marketers and other typical roles. Product management seems to be getting hit by all sides right now. And it's so easy to take this all on as an individual. And I am seeing this within the communities, is so many people are constantly questioning, is this the right job for me? Am I good enough to be doing this? I'm trying to keep up with everybody else. And that's before the business pressures come onto this as well. Just the pressures that you would get in business anyway. And the business wants you to be doing more, producing more, delivering faster. And there's no more money, there's no more resources, there's no more people to help you with all of this. And any one of those things is probably surmountable by itself. But everything is hitting right at the same time right now, and has been. Nick, what would you say? Last 18 months, 2 years has probably been some of the toughest times in our industry. And I've never known it like this. And so I absolutely believe that a lot of this is put on top of us. And it's actually quite a lot of it is stuff that doesn't need to be there as well, all of that additional pressure.
No, I agree. And like you say, there's just so many different factors that come into play, and it's all of those external attributions, but then the way that you can internalize that and feel that yourself. And it's important to understand those bits and how they come into play. Evelina, from your point of view, why do you think that some people are better able to cope with those pressures, whether they're external or if they're personal factors, than others?
Yeah, well, this is something that's been, part of my research for many years, because I was volunteering for charity called Maitri that works with suicidal people, and it really kind of hit me when I found myself in the situation where I was in a foreign country. I was building my life, my work from scratch without even speaking the language here, and then I never felt like I don't want to be here. And then yet you come to this respite center and you look at some people and you think, this guy has it all, right? Good career and money and good looks and family and like you name it. And there they are in this respite center not wanting to live. So for me, I couldn't really reconcile, what is it that I have that these people needed, because I don't know what is it that I need to give. So for me, I really wanted to understand what shapes us and all of those differences. And I spent now nearly 20 years of research on this. So in short, of course, there is a lot of our resilience aspects are developed through our childhood. And a lot of those aspects are being developed through the way our primary caregivers teach us to self-regulate and how they teach us to respond to the environment. There's a lot of those other aspects also related to what extent we are able to internalize results, and to what extent we are able to kind of look at it as the external process. So if something goes wrong, what is the self-talk that you're saying to yourself? Are you saying that, oh, this is because I'm not good enough and I'm not doing this? Or, oh, this is just the process. I've not done something in a right way, but that means I can correct my actions, but it doesn't change who I am, right? So this kind of disconnect between who am I and what I do, the moment you start merging the two and you start defining yourself based on the KPI success measures, and you're defining your self-worth based on your external results, that really hits you really hard. And this is something that I think as leaders, as managers, we all really can do in terms of how we praise people, in terms of how we reward people, to make sure that we encourage them and have them, give them that kind of aspect of self-worth and value them as individuals, and their results and their performance is a separate process. So I think, in a way, there are, when you look at what people have and what people need, you think, so what is it that we can learn? What is it that we can all take from these high performers who can cope, and what is it that we can pass on. And it's kind of three aspects of this resilience. And of course, it starts with self-awareness and kind of understanding yourself and what affects you and your environment and how your body responds to things. But then at the back of that awareness, you need to be able to do three things. So this is what I call, there's three levels of resilience. So there's emotional resilience. So this is like your internal self-regulation. So how well you're able to regulate your levels of stress, how well you are able to regulate your emotions, or is it emotions that are controlling you? So there is this kind of internal resilience. Then you have external social resilience. So this is how well you're able to adapt to different situations. So when you change jobs, when you have a new boss, when you move to a different country, when you get married, when some close person to you dies, how well you're able to adapt to the new social reality. And then the third bit is the behavioral resilience. And this is how well you're able to adapt theory in practice. And a lot of people know what is the right thing to do, but we don't do it, right? The behavioral aspect of it is really, really difficult. So it's those three, well, I will say four capacities, because first is self-awareness, and then there is this emotional self-regulation, the behavioral one, social aspect, and all of that contribute to how well you're able to cope to that environment.
No, it makes total sense. And what I will do is I'll share my screen and run through some of those statistics again, because I think a lot of this will relate to a lot of what product people are feeling. So some of the data that I have from the research that I was doing was that actually a lot of those sentiments that you just said, Evelina, are super high for product people. So people feel like they need to be perfect at their job, and their identity of success is defined a lot more by their career than other aspects of life. And if you're putting that kind of pressure on yourself to say, okay, I always need to be doing this, and I need to be doing this well, and feeling that responsibility to perform, that has a huge impact on your ability to separate those results, like you say, and following that process, or how you feel like you are as a person and how your success is. And going back to the most important factors that people highlighted in this research to be the biggest contributors to burnout, there was an individual belief that people felt a deep responsibility for the area of their work to perform in their area of the business, which is like you were saying, Graham, like if we've got all of this external pressure and all of this sentiment that we need to be doing more and we're not doing product properly and we're not doing this and we're not doing that, and you've also got these results you need to hit and that pressure internally, a lot of us can take that on and feel like it's something that we personally are responsible for, more so I think than engineers or people in UX or people in marketing, for example, because we can be so results driven in product. And then 83% also felt like to prove their value, they constantly have to work hard. So there's no taking the foot off the gas. Each quarter, there's new targets to hit. There's always something to be doing. And I think that factor can be super prominent. And then you also combine this with the factor that people felt like they're under pressure to perform at work and those external expectations from their team. So Nick, on your side, given those statistics, especially around the individuals and how they feel like they need to perform. And what I will say is that this research also highlighted that this was something that was felt all the way through from product managers up to directors of product and head of product. And actually, often in those leadership levels, these statistics were even more prominent. And I think sometimes that's because pressure is coming from different angles. So why would you say that these things are so high from what you've seen, especially in the leadership space?
So I've lived and breathed, product for probably a decade, and I've been the PM, the senior PM, the head of product. I now coach and consult and advise. And I think what unifies pretty much every product person that I've met is that, they're ambitious, they're driven, and we have a deep set sense, I think, of responsibility, not only to ourselves, but to our teams, because product is a team sport. I think that's one of the things that product people often forget. I often see this sort of pattern where the PM will go on what I call the hero or the heroine's quest, where they're trying to take on far too much on behalf of them and their team, whereas actually the whole point of building great products is to build great teams, and that needs collaboration. And to collaborate, you can't be so siloed and so narrow-minded. And when you've got that level of and sense of responsibility to not only the people around you, to your customers, to the business, when frankly, you are remunerated really well in product, I don't think there's any getting away. Even though we've been in a difficult spot, as Graham said, PMs are still one of the highest paid roles. And I know from clients that I'm coaching, outside of the UK, that those salaries are even greater in places like the US and Canada. So it's sort of no wonder, because we're creating this perfect storm of people that want to do a great job, people that want to be proud of the work they're doing, people that are trying to collaborate, and people that are fundamentally quite motivated by hitting big lofty goals that can pay back in career prospects, but also monetarily. And you said earlier, Evie, when you're a product leader, you feel squeezed from kind of all directions. You're managing the difficult conversations with stakeholders. You are fundamentally responsible for the well-being of a team of people. You're also responsible for their performance. You're then responsible for the performance of yourself, and you're then trying to manage whatever chaos and politics is going on above and around you. And most product leaders I've met want to do a great job, but they tend to put far too much pressure on the great job coming as a result of only their inputs. And what I think we have to remember is that when we're trying to drive outcomes, especially as product leaders, we do that with and through our teams. Product leaders in and of themselves cannot achieve great results without the people that work with them and for them.
Nick, I'd just like to jump in with something that's actually been mirrored on one of the comments on LinkedIn. Not directly related, but kind of related to what you've just kind of been talking about, kind of at the leadership level, but actually probably more business leadership. Is part of the problem that we're seeing at the moment, with a lot of pressure being put on people, then this can be from product leaders all the way through to ICs on the ground, that they're seen as replaceable. They're seen as people that can be, just replaced easily enough. We're putting so much pressure on ourselves and maybe by others to continue to perform well, to perform at the highest standards. And yes, of course, we should be looking to do that, but trying to do more and more all the time. And there's little there's little support in that. And we've talked, everybody has mentioned so far all along the way about the support, that we need to be giving people, whether they are leaders, ICs, whoever. But is there a problem that actually business leaders are not necessarily doing as well to look after their product people, as good as they are, as talented as they are, because actually right now they are dispensable?
I think the answer is obvious, in the regard that the four of us are sat here talking to a couple of hundred people on LinkedIn. There is a massive problem, and there is a massive problem outside of product more broadly, which is why on my mission to make work better, I'm spinning up a proposition called the human leader, because leadership has lost what it means to see humans as humans, with all the emotions and the baggage that comes with them. Fundamentally, it's humans that create extraordinary outcomes. And you do see in the number of layoffs, Graham, and you're a bit closer to this than I am, that I think a lot of product people are sort of quite exasperated that with the number of layoffs we're seeing across the tech space, it's very easy to feel like we are just numbers. And fundamentally, the role of leadership is to create the kind of conditions where human beings can thrive, to create the conditions where human beings can do great work. But from a leader's point of view, they are in quite a difficult position, because depending on where you are in that leadership hierarchy, sometimes your ability to affect what's going on at a more senior level or more macro level can be quite hampered. That's why I'm always a fan of leaders demonstrating a little bit of vulnerability, and actually demonstrating to their teams that when they're in those difficult situations, environments, conversations, let's kind of bring the team into that a little bit.
And I think there's a constant pressure, like that point that you just mentioned, Graham, that product's still a space where in a lot of organizations we're trying to prove our value, not just in terms of layoffs, but just in terms of it's like always results driven, and there's an ROI affected, and there's so much more chat these days about like how do you prove that profitability and that value in that space that other departments might not necessarily have to deal with. And I think that's a huge thing that means that people feel like they're under that additional pressure, and it doesn't always feel safe. It's like, how as a leader can you constantly be proving that, and also trying to extract from your teams, but also being there to support your teams and not make them feel under pressure. And it's like someone else said, like you're being squeezed from all angles. So I do think that's a big factor that comes into play. Which moves me on to the second point that I mentioned in terms of like there's these personal factors, how do we feel internally, and then there's the external factors, which is that pressure that we feel under from the organization. And as I mentioned, for 80% of people that responded to the survey, that pressure was felt quite heavily from the organization. So Evelina, like I know that you've specialized in terms of what makes great cultures and how do people work in this space. So why do you think that factor is so big? And what do you think people can do about it?
Yeah, well, environment is always bigger than us, right? I think there is this kind of misconception in a modern world that we are these kind of intelligent, independent, human beings. We are kind of leading with our heads, but in reality, that's not how we have evolved to survive over millions of years, right? We are part of the environment. We are part of that ecosystem. We are dependent on it, and our environment will always be bigger than us. And you can take the most vulnerable person with a history of all their mental illnesses and traumas and so on. You place them in a very supportive environment, they will still be able to perform and do well. Another way around, you can take the strongest individual, the most resilient person, you put them in a toxic working environment under too much pressure, you don't give them enough support, and they will still end up being compromised and burning out eventually. So I think a lot of that comes from this kind of mindset, of this kind of individualistic mindset where we put too much responsibility on the individual. And I see this so many companies, let's say they're reaching out to me, oh, let's call this, neuroscientist to deliver stress resilience workshop to our people. So, we can pile more on them, they can cope better, right? And, I always push that back to them and say like, yeah, but what are you doing to create more supportive environment? How can you really create the environment where each person can be their best, can perform at their best? And they're like, us? Nah, it's nothing got to do with the business, right? It's like these people are like snowflakes, this generation that can't cope. And that this really comes from that unhealthy attitude that, we still don't understand, the role of that environment. Leaders don't understand the role of that environment, and they just refuse to take the responsibility for individual health, for individual well-being, for their individual resilience. And yet that contribution is way bigger than any one individual can do. So yeah, absolutely. It comes from a lot of kind of societal misconceptions and the way we structure our businesses, the way we prioritize, and this kind of individualistic approach of placing everything on shoulders of one individual instead of looking at how we have evolved through millions of years to survive, to cope. What does that mean for our health and well-being? And therefore, how can we use those lessons to create environments and working conditions that are good for humans? And, back to what Graham was saying as well about this, kind of we're not seeing humans as valuable, right? We prioritize technology and AI as something like, oh, AI gonna take your job, right? Like, what does that mean for you, for your pressure? What does that mean for how you're gonna perform? So it's really this unhealthy relationship with our work, unhealthy relationship with technology, unhealthy relationship with some goals and targets and expectations, and also the way we set goals is not healthy. And we are so driven by this short-term, profit-driven, shareholder value maximization, which is just completely unreasonable. And it puts all of this pressure instead of looking at what is the value that this business providing for next generation, right? What is our purpose? What is our, identity of the organization that our business serves? So we can really look beyond those kind of short-term struggles and kind of daily objectives and targets. This just becomes the how, and it becomes flexible. It becomes more meaningful, right? When we are all connected with this kind of bigger picture, bigger direction that we all believe in, kind of the bigger purpose that we are all playing part on. So it's a lot of shift that needs to happen away from the profit to purpose, away from, short-term goals to kind of long-term sustainable, way of being, away from individual to ecosystemic thinking, and each of us taking responsibility of things that we can control.
No, I love all of those points. And what I would say at this point, I think you can all comment if you're watching on LinkedIn. And if you are, and if you've worked for an environment, especially in a product space that has handled this really well, like, I would love it if you could share your experiences and just pop those in the comments. And even for anyone that hasn't, like, if you want to share your experiences, feel free to do so, because I think what we're lacking a lot of the time in product, Evelina, going back to the points that you just made, are those environments where we are looking longer term. So a lot of the work that I do with companies now, and this stuff all aids with burnout, I think, is helping people to identify what those strategies are and how to set those teams up for success, and how to make sure that you're not just flip-flopping between priorities every quarter to say, hey, we set these OKRs. Oh, we didn't hit those. Now we're going to set these new OKRs. Okay, now you're going to pivot and this team needs to go work on this. And we constantly have this. And then never mind like startups that I've spoken to and worked with, where it's like, oh, we've only got a cash flow that's going to last this many months, so therefore we need to be constantly hitting these results. And I think trying to create that environment in the product space that we know should be a positive environment is probably one of the hardest types of organizations to create it in. So I struggle to find examples of people that have done this really well. So like I say, if anyone has them, please share. And like between Evelina, Graham, Nick, like, have you got any examples where you've seen that this has been handled well to create environments that aren't creating burnout in the product space? And if no one has any examples, I'll move on to a different question.
Yeah, I probably have plenty of examples, but I don't know if they are really from product space, right? So I'm sitting on a panel judging well-being awards for culture pioneers, and you can see some examples of where things are being done well. This is where companies are prioritizing well-being at organizational level, right? And I think, of course, we have huge differences in different teams, in different, industries, in different organizational structures. But at the end of the day, I think if company prioritizes human health, employee well-being as one of their biggest priorities, then it will definitely translate into how exactly you lead the product teams differently as a result of that, right? And humanizing, right? Taking it away from the tech, from the product, looking at what is the role of humans in that translates to this. And some examples where things are being done well, and where more of this kind of humanistic approach is being used is some charities, because they have so little resources, so much pressure, but they have this bigger purpose of what do we serve, how we do that. So there are some charities that they do that well, but there are also some companies that you wouldn't really kind of expect much from them. So there are company, for example, called One and All, and they do uniform manufacturing. And yes, they create products, they create the actual physical products that they're designing, developing, but they build this culture of people and support. And now they are fully people-owned organization, so they give shares to people, and it's really different mindset shift with the work that they were able to do. There's also company like Northumbrian Water, for example. They completely redesigned their entire culture based on this Swedish concept of hygge. There is this like little book of hygge. It's spelled Hygge, and they build their entire culture based on that, saying simplify, like beauty in simple things, like little meaningful touches all throughout the day. And they completely redesigned their entire culture based on that principle. So it really comes from this kind of bigger picture of how do we see humans? How do we live the purpose? There are some smaller organizations like Norden's, Progeny, Venture 10 that I've seen when I was judging them in the Wellbeing Pioneers, small companies with very little resources, and yet they choose to prioritize humans over the tech. And they are maybe not tech led, but tech enabled, and they always kind of put humans first. One interesting thing that I've observed, and I don't know whether that's useful or not, is that when we look at the overall concept of what kind of companies are prioritizing well-being and what kind of companies do well-being right, it's actually companies that have women on their boards. And this is very interesting because, and this is another reason why I'm so passionate in mentoring female executives and really giving them that seat at that position where they can shape entire company and the vision and the way of working. There is something different about feminine energy and how we work with people and this kind of more ecosystemic, holistic thinking. When you place women at the board, it really translates all the way to the bottom of the organization. And obviously, this doesn't mean that all companies led by men are not that, another way around, but just in general, both men and women have both energies, right? And there are women who are very kind of male-driven energy, another way around. So it's really this kind of feminine traits. When we apply them in organizations, it actually really creates a lot of supportive, trusting environments, and yeah, this is definitely something to watch out for.
No, I love that kind of research, and like even working for myself on a personal level, I've noticed that difference in being able to play to that energy. And I think it's like it starts to move out of the product world into what a lot of people might perceive as a bit more like, I want to say wishy-washy, even though I absolutely don't believe that's the case. But I think there's so much importance in understanding these things, like at an organizational level, but also in terms of your own energy and your own energy management and how to make that work, so you're not always living in a different energy to what is beneficial for you. Nick, I wanted to follow up with a question for you, because I don't feel like we have got any product examples of where we've managed to achieve these things really well, but taking into account some of the things that Evelina was just talking about in terms of this is what could make a strong organizational culture that helps prevent burnout and actually creates a thriving environment. What do you think we should be doing in product organizations to support with that?
So when I was considering this question, I mean, I had about 25 different things. So I've tried to boil it down into a top 5, but I just wanted to share a stat that I think lands the point probably far better than I can. So for 70% of people, managers have the same impact on their well-being as their partners, which I think is striking. But if you flip the coin and you look at it from the manager's point of view, 82% of managers have had no formal training, and 33% feel out of their depth for having these types of conversations. So for me, what this tells us is that within product organizations and pretty much every other organization, if we're going to tackle this topic, we have to spend more time on managers. For too long, we spent time doing the things that we talked about to try and encourage individuals to shift mindset and change behaviors. And I still think that's really important. We talked at sort of the board level, and I'm glad that Evelina made that point about, well-being being a strategic pillar, because it absolutely has to be. But there's this whole layer of managers that aren't fully equipped to create the kind of, should we call them, subcultures that take a lead from whatever the organization's doing within, large product orgs or smaller product teams. So if there are any managers listening, or if there are folks that want to be brave enough to have a conversation with a manager, this is what I would suggest. The first thing is listening and observing. I mean, this is a core skill that any product person should have. We teach and we train and we coach people that part of a product mindset is starting from the position of seeking to understand, not trying to solve. How many product leaders can hand on heart say that this is a topic that they're listening and observing on? They may be listening and observing to stakeholder meetings, to user interviews, to prototypes, but how much time are they spending with their team in creating a trusted space, either anonymized or not, where they can hear how people are feeling? That always has to be the first port of call for me, because that's where the insight comes from. Leaders or managers need to start looking a bit more in the mirror and asking some of the questions that we've kind of talked about to create these thriving cultures. As a leader, and therefore as a product manager, I need to understand, is there a compelling vision? Do I understand the direction of travel? Am I bought into the mission? Do I have a strategy that allows me to prioritize, but more importantly, allows me to deprioritize? So I've heard all of you sort of talk, and Graham talked about it earlier, that we're throwing more at less people with less resources. There are two possible solutions. The first is we burn people into the ground. The second, which is where we want to head towards, is that we are only doing the most important things that drive impact. And we have to be quite deliberate and quite intentional, and managers have a real role to play to shield the team, because that might mean out of 10 of the strategic priorities, we can only go after one. But that's where managers need to be equipped to be having those types of conversations. If managers can give the teams that space to work on the most important problems and opportunities, and to your earlier point, Evie, they give them the time. This is not a quarter's work. It might be 2 or 3 quarters work. You start to see change, but you're not going to start to see change in days or weeks. It takes a little bit longer. We talked about wellbeing not being a tick box. This shouldn't be a temporary entry on the pad. Please don't just talk about this as an arbitrary topic on World Mental Health Day. Let's talk about it 365 days of the year. Otherwise, this will never change. We need to have more conversations. Like, I was so happy to be invited to this. I'm delighted to see the growth in your community, Graham. This needs to be talked about on LinkedIn and product communities. I would love to see a product tank or some big product forum dedicated to this topic, to the topic of humans in product. Too much of the discourse is still around methodologies and process and infighting and challenging strongly held opinions, but we're forgetting the humans in the middle of it. I'd really encourage all of us to think about that. And the final one, and it is going to be a bit of a selfish plug, I'm afraid, is that I genuinely believe that we need to completely shift the way that we manage people. And I've created, with my co-founder, the Human Leader, because the Human Leader is about shifting what it means to be a great manager. And we've kind of touched on some of these things, but it's about managers being comfortable to be self-aware, managers being more comfortable with collaboration, communication, and managers really understanding that they are not there to get tasks done. The role of a manager is to get the best from their people to deliver sustainable long-term outcomes. And as we talked about earlier, almost 90% of managers have had no formal training. I think we need to change that. So the Human Leader is my big bet on that. So watch this space. So they're my top 5. I could have had another 20, but I'm sure Graham and Evelina might have some ideas to add to that list.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Nick. I think definitely I see the same issue in my work where, managers are being pushed into those leadership positions without having any training. And they might be very good technical people, but they don't know how to be human. And it's sometimes not their fault. They are being placed in those positions without any training, without any background for it. So absolutely, leaders need more of training, more of the development, and the role of leaders is actually to constantly renegotiate the contract between human needs and the needs of the business. And we forget that, right? We think that this is a one-way street, that leaders, managers just need to push those results and deliver the outcomes. No, it's about two-way street. And you are, again, going back to that stat, Nick, that you said that, the impact on people's well-being is exactly the same as your partner, right, from the manager. So it shows this relational importance, the relational aspect that we are building on that. Jasper made some comments here about the fact that a lot of leaders, managers, they have gone through these difficulties themselves, and they think that was something that was good for them. I had to struggle, that built my character, it made me who I am, so I made others suffer too, so they can be better, and so on, right? And there's a lot of this that we are seeing from managers that are being passed on, this kind of generational unhealthy traits, right? When we are not questioning, what is right, what is good, how we can constantly improve better. And no, that's not the only way, right? And just because that was your experience, it doesn't mean that you have to pass it on and create, the same experience for others. So definitely, I think we really need to look at what's the future, where we're going, and how can we give leaders better tools so that they are not bringing their own traumas, their own past negative experiences and passing it on. We really need to break the cycle and kind of humanize the entire leadership field.
No, I totally agree. And I think it makes such a difference. If you start to get that part right, then you create these positive role models, and then you manage to make this change that can pass through the organization. So it's super, super important. One last question that I wanted to finish on is around what the individual can do. Because even when we talk about leaders, and even when we talk about leaders stepping up and being able to showcase these examples, they're still the individual. They still need to know how they can prevent themselves from getting burnt out across these stages. And for anyone that's not in that position, like what they can do to help themselves. So Graham, back over to you. What key strategies do you think people can be putting in place to be able to support with those things?
I think it's really interesting because, Nick was right earlier that we need to be focusing on the leaders, the managers, the leadership of the business as a whole, businesses across the world, to kind of change, the way that they look at mental health as a whole for their employees, not just on burnout, but across the whole spectrum. And Nick was also right as well that there's only so much the individual can do, particularly at the IC level, but not exclusive to that. As an individual, if you don't have kind of that support from those around you and above you, it's very, very difficult to help yourself, and absolutely as leaders to help others as well. And Evelina, I'm reminded of that survey that you and I both did about 3 or 4 years ago, just at the start of the pandemic, where we were assessing the mental health and well-being of people across the spectrum, very similar to what you've done here, Evie. And overwhelmingly, it was first level managers that were feeling the most pressure out of everybody. This all continually just supports each other. There isn't enough training, there isn't enough support. For the individual, though, what I focus most on is, okay, look, what can you do, and how can you help yourself? And by and large, absolutely, it is seeking out people to talk to, and seeking out people that you can have a good conversation with. The Product Mind community, again, shameless plug, the Product Mind community is a free community for anybody in the product space, even engineers, designers, product operations, whatever, to just come and be in a safe space. And Evie and Nick, you're both part of this space as well, I know, to be able to talk with people around you and understand the similar sort of pressures and strains and problems that you're trying to solve. And these could be problems, physical problems at work that you're trying to solve, with a problem with actually within your job, or actually more likely something that's on your mind personally. And being able to talk with people, even if there isn't a way to kind of solve it immediately, is well known, and Evelina, you'll back this up as well, is to be a great starting point to help yourself. And look at those things that you can actually do and achieve yourself as well. In the current climate, it's not as easy to just go, well, I'll just go and get myself another job, or, I'll just quit and go and do something else, or whatever. The reality is, it's not that easy. And I'm somebody that absolutely lives in the reality of the world. It's not as easy to do that right now. I know that for myself. And so actually, what are the things that we can do? And we talk about this all the time within the community. I talk about it a lot on LinkedIn. We all talk a lot about these sorts of things, absolutely. And I think it's just talking and being there to also talk to others as well, in a way that is safe for you and for them. But that's absolutely the first port of call.
Evie,
Evie, you're on mute.
This is the first time it's happened. We're 58 minutes
whole
in.
hour.
Couldn't go 60, could we?
I was so distracted by my screen share just now. I'm like, oh God, Evelina. What I will do is I'll quickly wrap this up for anyone that's going to drop off at like 2:00, and then we can continue chatting about anything that you wanted to say then. Evelina, for anyone else that does choose to stay on for a few minutes longer. So what I would say is this report has also got loads of insight from things that different product people have suggested that have helped them in the burnout space at an individual level. And I've linked to all of the resources that you can access here to help you on a personal level, and talks about organizational expectations and links to all of the resources that we've spoken about today and where you can continue to get support. So if this is something that you're keen to continue to expand on, either for yourself or as a leader or as your organization as a whole, please reach out to one of us. Like, we can come and do more in terms of, Evelina runs workshops with organizations that supports with these things. As Graham mentioned, there's a community that you can access. As Nick mentioned, there's a load of leadership training that they're running, and I'm more than happy to go in and talk to organizations about this kind of topic and try and raise this awareness and start to make a change and be able to do something about it. So please do reach out, please access all of these resources, please get your hands on this report. And we're keen to continue to share as much as possible as we can on this topic and keep growing. So yeah, that's being said, if anyone wants to drop off now, feel free to do so. But Evelina, now that I'm off mute, I'll go back to you and say, what else do you want to cover off the back of Graham's point?
Yeah, sure. I know there's quite a lot of comments coming up, so it's really great to see people engaging in that conversation. So we are more than happy to stay a bit longer and continue chatting and answering people's questions from now on. So absolutely, I think there is so much that each and every one of us can do, and to help ourselves, but also to help others. And the biggest thing is actually clear boundaries. And this is clear boundaries between your personal life and work, between even the physical space. I cannot really kind of stress the importance of having clear physical space for your work and rest time, especially now as people are working in more kind of hybrid, remote working environments. The amount of time that people eat dinner in front of, or lunch in front of their desks, the amount of time that we are working from bedrooms, this is not allowing our nervous system to have clear boundaries between, this is my productive space, this is my workspace, and this is actually my rest space. So we are creating these continuous boundaries where we are always on. I did heart rate variability continuous monitoring with people as part of some of my like stress resilience coaching programs. And the biggest thing that I see again and again and again is that when people are having their lunch break, they are not going into this parasympathetic nervous system, which means that they are staying in this high level stress, switch on, sympathetic nervous system activation. And those boundaries are so important to help recover, right? We might be going through a lot of stress, but it's okay. Our body is built for that. What it's not built for is to have that stress switch on all the time. So for as long as we have those clear boundaries and say, okay, this is my time when I can give my all and I push and I be stressed, but this is my time when I know how to switch off. I know how to draw those clear boundaries. I know how not to reply to those emails, outside of working hours. So there is so many different little things that we all can do to draw those boundaries. I'd say that's one of the biggest things to allow our body to recover and rest. Also, really understanding your triggers. What are your stress triggers? And what are cognitive triggers? So some of those things are only in our heads. So we might be worrying about things that are outside of our control and we cannot do anything about it, right? So if it's out of your control, forget about it, right? It's out of your control. You can't do anything. There's no need to be elevating your stress, because stress response is there to manage this state, to do something about it. If you can't do anything about it, don't worry about it. And if you can do something about it, great. It's in your control, right? So what is it that you can do and how can you manage that situation? And absolutely, I think there's so many little things that we all can do, and starting with those boundaries, looking at what's in our control, what's out of our control, being able to raise our hand and say, I struggle here, I need help. so often we kind of put too much of this kind of brave face, and we are scared to show vulnerability. So of course nobody gonna dare to offer support to us, just not to offend us. So the way we show up, the way we role model some of us values and behaviors as leaders, as individuals, can have a huge impact on our teams, on our culture of the entire organization. So yeah, I mean, there's so much more that I can share. I have a little ebook on stress resilience that looks at kind of like hidden factors that kind of cause your stress, such as lack of those clear boundaries between your physical and rest space and so on. So if anybody would like to have some of those resources, just DM me. I'm more than happy to share.
No, and honestly, I could dig into so much there, because everything you're saying is so accurate. And these are things that I've had to learn to do personally over a period of time. But it's always so much easier said than done. Like, oh, just don't worry about those things and set those boundaries. And you always have, like, what I found is that there's so many underlying beliefs, like you said at the start, that actually come from your childhood and all of these different things that you need to dig through and unpick to allow you to do those things with confidence. But what I would say is, like, it takes bits of practice, like setting one boundary a day, enforcing that boundary, seeing that nothing bad happens off the back of it, like choosing to say, I'm not going to worry about this thing for the next week, and I'm just going to see what happens because it's out of my control. And just teaching yourself to run those things as experiments and see that this stuff is fine. It all works. You can still be good at your job. You can still perform really well. You can still deliver amazing results, and sometimes even better, because you're not trying to go at 120 miles per hour all of the time.
Absolutely. Like, one of the best things that I have done is to get the dog. And having a dog forces you to get out of your house a few times a day, go for a walk. And because I've been trying to walk the dog at consistent times, now it's like a clock, right? Okay, walk time. And now I've blocked this in my diary, right? Every day at the specific time, I have my calendar blocked out that nobody is going to book anything into it, because that's, my dog walking time. So there's a lot of things, like you say, sometimes, it's easier said than done. It's just like we need to learn how to control our beliefs, change a lot of our values, change our habits and behaviors. And this is a long process of change, right? It sometimes requires support, sometimes professional support and coaching and therapy to work through some of these, what stops you from switching off, right? Like, what are the fears that are holding you back? What are specific habits and unhealthy ways of coping that you have developed for yourself that are not allowing you to recover, but actually are building on this pressure? So yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help. And it's like, we sometimes all know what's good for us, right? Have good work-life balance, draw those boundaries, don't believe your own thoughts, right? But it's of course, in reality, is so much more difficult. And therefore, that's why we have the, those communities and the resources and so on that we do. So it's all there, but you need to take proactive step to engage with those resources if you want to benefit from them.
Agreed. Totally agreed. And there's a bunch of good stuff there. So if anyone does want any of this stuff, please do reach out. Graham, Nick, anything else to add?
No, great way to end, I think.
Sweet.
I feel like we need many more hours to talk about this, given the comments and the number of people watching.
And this is even what Nick and I said before, is that it'd be great to do some more deep dives on some of these subjects. Like, this is a first pass to say, hey, everyone, here's an overview about everything that we can cover. But things that I'm keen to do are to try and extend this research to more people, to increase the sample size so that we can really dig into different factors, and to bring in some more experts so we can really give people that support and those resources, and that we can really start to drive a change across these organizations. So 100%, if this is something that you're interested in and keen to progress, please reach out to any one of us, and we'll talk about how we can help and how we can continue the conversation, not just leave it here, and do some more deep dives into some of these areas. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you very much, Evelina, Graham, Nick, for handing over your time and giving so much detailed advice on this topic and being so vulnerable with your shares. It's really appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Evie, for your
listening. Bye-bye.
And thank you, everyone who engaged as well. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye.